The wife of King Edward VII, Alexandra of Denmark, accepted his death with dignified calmness and regal grace. However, the same cannot be said about his young mistress Alice Capel. Learning that Edward was seriously ill, Alice hurried to the gates of Buckingham Palace, waving a letter from the king, trying to get an audience. In the end, the guards gave up and allowed her to enter. However, when they found out what she had done inside, they probably regretted this decision. The Victorian era in England was famous for strict moral standards, but with closed doors it was different. The public could consider themselves restrained and highly moral, but in private life, Victorian society was mired in drunkenness, revelry, and scandals. And no one personified this duplicity better than Queen Victoria's son, the future King Edward VII. His love affairs became a source of rumors and gossip for centuries, and his mother, Queen Victoria, was deeply ashamed of her son. However, despite this, Dirty Bertie, as he was nicknamed, knew how to be a king with style and charisma. The future King Edward VII was born on the 9th of November, 1841 year, in the majestic Buckingham Palace. His parents gave him the name Albert Edward, but quickly began to call him simply Bertie. As the eldest son, he was the heir to the English throne from birth. Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert sought to cultivate in their son all the necessary qualities for a future ruler. However, their hopes were not fulfilled. Bertie's older sister, Victoria, was an exemplary student, and Bertie himself barely coped with academic studies. He sincerely tried to impress his parents, but studying was hard for him. Nevertheless, his teachers noted that despite his modest academic achievements, he had incredible charm, a quality that will make him one of the most popular monarchs of history. But for Victoria and Albert, charm didn't matter. They saw their son as a loser. Under the weight of parental expectations, Bertie could not help but break down. At 19, he finally found his true calling when he went on an official tour of North America as the Prince of Wales. Everywhere he appeared, he was greeted by crowds of people. Years of disappointment in the eyes of his parents made Bertie a shy young man with low self-esteem. But the success of the tour changed him. He returned home full of self-confidence. And like any young and attractive aristocrat, with his newfound confidence, he could not help but pay attention to women. So began his scandalous life, which, like his successful tours, made many talk about him with undisguised admiration. In 1861 year, Edward's parents sent him to Germany, ostensibly to observe military maneuvers. However, the true purpose was different. Edward has already turned almost 20 years old, and it is time to look for a wife for him. When Edward went to Germany, there, as if by magic, there was a woman whom his parents wanted to see as his wife. The prince met Princess Alexandra of Denmark, or Alex, as her family called her, and they quickly found a common language. It has not been long since the families entered into a marriage agreement. But there was one problem. Alexandra was not the only woman with whom young Bertie communicated at that time. Shortly before his trip to Germany, Edward visited Ireland, where he met actress Nellie Clifton. She became the first of his many mistresses. Edward went to Ireland for military training, but his fellow cadets were happy to support his rebellious tendencies. They even let Nellie hide in the barracks for 3 days, while she and Edward enjoyed time together. According to rumors, it was with Nellie Clifton that the prince lost his innocence. At that time, the prince was 19 years old, and he was enjoying life, but soon everything went downhill. If there was one thing Victorians loved, it was gossip. Soon, rumors of Edward's affair reached his parents. Prince Albert, already weak due to illness, went to Ireland to have a serious talk with his son. Father and son spent a long walk in the rain, but Albert's stern words did not stop Edward. And the cold weather only worsened Prince Albert's condition. He died just 2 weeks later, probably from Crohn's disease. Queen Victoria was heartbroken. She wore mourning clothes for the rest of her days, but some of her sadness soon turned into rage. She has always been cold to her son, considering him a loser. But after Albert's death, her contempt turned into hatred. The grief of losing his father and the hatred of his mother did not stop Edward, on the contrary. He continued to live in his former rhythm. Edward married Princess Alexandra of Denmark at Windsor Castle on the 10th of March, 1863. However, no marriage contract could keep Edward VII from his habits. Their marriage, despite everything, was happy, but only because Alexandra endured her husband's love affairs. Edward continued to have mistresses throughout his life. And although no one knows the exact number, historians associate at least 55 women with the name of the king. For his many affairs, he received the nickname Dirty Bertie. Despite all this, Edward never acknowledged any illegitimate child, which raises suspicion. Either he was extremely unproductive, or he simply lied. In 1864, Lady Susan Van Tempest lost her husband. In her grief, she found solace in Edward's arms. A letter to Edward, written by one of Susan's friends in 1871, said that the crisis would come in 2 or 3 months. It was a clear hint of pregnancy. However, Susan never mentioned the baby, and that secret went with her to the grave when she died at the age of 36. In 1869, Edward got into an even louder scandal when Sir Charles Moran, a member of Parliament, threatened to name him in the process of divorce from his wife Carrie Moran. Sir Charles found a compromising letter from the Prince of Wales in his wife's desk. Once he even found them together in the house, although he did not find them in bed. However, in the Victorian era, finding a man and a woman alone in the house was already a cause for scandal. Moran drove the prince out of the house in anger, but his rage did not subside. He took it out on 2 ponies, shooting them in front of his wife. The aristocratic version of expel the cat. Although the court found no evidence that Edward was guilty, his reputation was severely damaged. As for Lady Moran, her lawyers argued that she was insane as a defense. And although Edward continued his adventures in Europe, she spent the rest of her life in oblivion. And then was sent to a psychiatric hospital. Edward VII was known for his scandals, love affairs, and a life full of pleasures, receiving the infamous nickname Dirty Bert. Despite his questionable actions, he remained extremely popular among the people, especially after he almost died of typhus in 1871 year. People's love for him seemed unshakable, even despite the constant rumors about his adventures. Edward had an incredible charm, and his charisma extended to everyone, regardless of their status or origin, which made him an object of admiration. One of the reasons why Edward remained a favorite of the public, despite the scandals, was his ability to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their social status. He condemned the racism he encountered during a trip to India, and did not hesitate to communicate with a Jewish Rothschild family, which set him apart from his biased contemporaries. However, his personal life was far from cloudless. One of Edward's most famous novels was with actress Lily Langry, which lasted about 3 years. When Lady Grey became pregnant, and most likely not from Edward, their relationship ended, but they remained friends, which showed an unexpected decent side in him, despite his reputation. Edward spent much of his life in Paris, where he became a legend in the local hotspots. His frequent visits to the famous La Chabanais brothel allowed him to create a private room decorated with his coat of arms. Love for the idea of a woman led to the fact that he ordered a special love chair to cope with his desires, despite the impressive size. Although Edward's vices formed a significant part of his image, his charm, sense of humor, and ability to find a common language with people provided him with popular love. However, this was not enough to win the favor of his mother, Queen Victoria, who could not forgive him for his rampant lifestyle. If you had visited the nightlife of Paris in the 1880s, you would surely have met the future King Edward VII. He enjoyed the city's nightclubs, especially the legendary Moulin Rouge, where he came every week again by a French socialite or actress. In comparison with the gloomy and depressing London, where he was pressed by the eternal mourning mood of his mother, Queen Victoria, it is not surprising that Edward spent so much time in Paris. However, Edward's life did not consist only of burlesque shows and light entertainment. He had many children, whom he left in England. His wife, Princess Alexandra, according to contemporaries, was completely calm about her husband's numerous love affairs. Moreover, she even hosted some of his mistresses at home and confessed it publicly. However, over time, even Edward was forced to slow down a little, although love affairs accompanied him until his death. The woman's passion was replaced by new vices, and gambling became the main one among them. In 1890, there was a scandal that shocked the royal family. Edward joined a group of aristocrats for a game of baccarat at Arthur Wilson's house. However, the game was illegal, and a scandal broke out when one of Edward's friends, Sir William Gordon Cumming, was accused of fraud. This case came to court, and the prince had to testify, which was the first time in 400 years that the heir to the British throne was summoned to court. Sir Gordon Cumming was found guilty. He was expelled from the army and expelled from society. The reputation of Edward himself was seriously damaged, and public opinion about him reached the bottom. Scandals did not escape the eldest son of Edward, Prince Albert Victor. The young prince became the subject of rumors of debauchery, and he was also associated with speculation about the possible involvement in the case of Jack the Ripper. But his life was tragically cut short in 1892 year at the age of only 27. He died of pneumonia caused by the influenza epidemic of 1889 year. Edward was devastated. His letters to his mother show how hard he was going through the loss of his son. Despite the loss, Edward soon resumed his intrigues. In the 1890s, he met Alice Capel, a woman 26 years younger than him, with whom he began an affair. As with his other mistresses, Edward treated Alice very generously. Daria gave her shares of a rubber company, which brought her a fortune. Edward also met with famous women of his time, including Lady Randolph Churchill, the mother of the future British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Their affair generated a lot of gossip, and by that time Edward had already become the central figure of the British gossip column. Queen Victoria passed a long life, but in January of 1901, she died, and Edward finally became king. At the age of 60, Edward finally became king, embodying his mother's worst nightmare. All her life, she had been sure that he would become a terrible ruler, but Edward turned out to be full of surprises. His coronation went as many expected. He invited several of his mistresses to the ceremony and even made sure that separate seats were reserved for them. Despite numerous scandals, Edward was one of the most popular people in England, and the people greeted his accession to the throne with glee. In the end, Victoria was wrong about her failed son. He became a real breath of fresh air after her long and strict management. However, Edward's reign was short-lived. Recall that Victoria ruled for 63 years, and Edward did not last 10 years. By 1909 year, his health began to deteriorate. He lost consciousness during a visit to Berlin, and a year later fainted again in France. Edward's illness came at an extreme and opportune moment. England was going through a constitutional crisis. A liberal government was elected, but the Conservative House of Lords refused to approve their budget. This required the king's attention, but Edward was too ill to return to England. Moreover, his entourage hid information about his illness from the public, and everyone thought that he was just having fun in France, like in the old days. On the 6th of May, 1910, the king suffered several heart attacks. The doctors begged him to go to bed, but Edward insisted on working until the end. Soon he could no longer stand, and died the same evening. Edward VII, known as Dirty Bertie, passed away. When his funeral was over, the hall was opened to the public, and in 2 days, more than 400,000 people came to say goodbye to their beloved king. His mistresses also came, but most of them showed more tact than Alice Capel. When Capel found out that the king was dying, she dropped everything and hurried to Buckingham Palace. When she arrived there, she insisted on being let in, waving a letter supposedly written by the king himself. The guards, yielding, still let her in, but soon regretted it. Alice made such a scene that even patient Alexandra couldn't stand it. The queen ordered the guards to take out Capel, which put an end to her stay in the highest circles of British society. However, her legacy lives on to this day. The current King Charles is married to the great-granddaughter of Capel, Camille Parker Bowes. Indeed, the royal family knows how to keep their connections within their circle. If you liked the video, write your comments. See you soon.